I am not.
Good afternoon and welcome to the August 29th meeting of Everett Public Schools Board of Directors. This is technically our last year of the meeting, the last meeting of the year. You can see where I've been all summer. Although it feels like the first, actually. Before we begin tonight, we'd like to take a moment of silence. Dr. Cohen?
Yes, so you'll see in front of the room, just off to my right, your left, a table that's been set up with some candles and some diploma covers from our high schools. Many of you probably know that in July, we experienced the loss of 3 Jackson High School students due to a terrible car crash, a crash that affected many students, their families, staff, and many community members. Travis Nelson was a 10th grade student last year. Prior to Jackson High School, he attended Gateway and Silver Firs elementary schools. Landon Staley was a 10th grade student last year. He also attended Gateway Middle and Silver Firs elementary school. Kayla Sorensen was a 9th grade student last year. Prior to Jackson High, she attended Heatherwood Middle and Woodside Elementary. The parents of these young people had hopes and dreams for their students. They thought about them graduating from Jackson High School, and they thought about the lives that they would lead. These candles and diplomas, similar to the type of ceremony that the military keeps for those lost, represents the gifts these families have given us, their children. The board asks that we take a moment of silence in honor of the lives lost too soon and in honor of what they could have become. May they rest in peace.
Thank you. Would you please join me for the flag salute?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Will the secretary please call the roll?
President Mason.
Present.
Vice President Andrews.
Present.
Director Lassane.
Present.
Director Mitchell.
Present.
Director Winter.
Present.
Thank you. As always, our first item of business tonight is the adoption of the agenda. Dr. Cohen, would you please introduce the agenda for this evening?
I'd be happy to. Consistent with the plans established at your 2016 Summer Planning Workshop, tonight's agenda contains several elements related to both the district's strategic plan and the board's annual goals. There is a segment this evening for routine business, a segment for recognition. There is not, however, a segment for strategic progress monitoring. We forego that typically during this meeting. One for information items, a segment for unfinished business, a segment for new business, one for upcoming agenda items, and one for board comments. Since publishing the agenda to you, the following changes have been made, or will be. Item 8.1, the superintendent's report will be updated during the meeting as is customary for your regular meetings. Item 13.1, adoption of Resolution 1158, affirming our commitment to safe and inclusive schools for each student, was revised because I made an error in the resolution language and uploaded the correction. Item 13.3, YMCA of Snohomish County, Special Facilities and Services Agreement was corrected because for some reason the version with all of my corrections didn't get uploaded. The previous one did. We caught that and uploaded the correct one shortly afterwards, so that was revised. In all other respects, the agenda is as it was published to you. You may elect to change the order of business by a majority vote of the members. However, this is not the point of the agenda to request items be removed from the consent agenda. So given that presentation to you, we ask your approval of tonight's agenda.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved by Director Wenta and seconded by Director Mitchell to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Our next order of business is we have a new assistant principal in our midst, and I believe Dr. Stewart is going to introduce to us Evergreen Middle School's assistant principal, Jacob Ellsworth.
Yes, good afternoon. So flexibility and make it happen on short notice are words and phrases that describe Jacob Ellsworth, assistant principal at Evergreen Middle School. So let me see if I can provide you a visual and some evidence of why I'm saying that. So here you are, Jacob. Slide just for you.
He's cringing a little bit.
So let's see. Wait a second. Show slideshow here. No wave. So this is why. So Jacob, if you look at this slide here, Jacob accepted his position in Everett Public Schools on July 5th at noon, and he was one of the first administrators to catch the 7:30 departure of the new admin bus tour. So there you see him. He's there, traveled from Auburn to get here, and Sally's welcoming him. And he was engaged the entire 2 days and really enjoyed getting to know his new colleagues. So in honor of your flexibility, your great attitude, and the ability to make it happen on short notice, I'm going to give you a little bus to remind you of those first 2 days in Everett Public Schools, and we appreciate your flexibility and your ability to make things happen on short notice, and we hope you keep those two qualities. All right, Jacob? So let me tell you a little bit about Jacob. Jacob has a history of making things happen in schools, too. He holds a bachelor's degree in elementary ed from Western Washington University, a master's degree in geosciences from Mississippi State University, and a master's degree in educational leadership from the University of Idaho. He began his teaching career, I found this very interesting, as a science educator at the Pacific Science Center, and then as a middle school science teacher at Beaver Lake Middle School in Issaquah. He joins the district most recently from Auburn School District, where he was an assistant principal at Arthur Jacobson Elementary. And in fact, one of our teachers recently at one of the training, somewhere here in the Seattle area, met a teacher from your school, and she was sharing how disappointed they were that they were losing you, but what a gift it was going to be to Evergreen Middle School. So I thought I would share that with you. And then prior to being in Auburn, Jacob was principal at Palouse Prairie K-8 Charter School in Idaho. When asked about his biggest impact in schools, he said, "I am most proud of the extensive math research that I have done that's focused on grade 8. I am also proud of the experiences I've had in teaching a variety of students in grades 1 through 8. And then finally, I am really, really proud of the amazing connections that I have made with students at all grade levels." I asked Jacob to tell me what a perfect weekend day would look like for him. Notice I didn't say weekday, just weekend. Yeah. Once in a while, Jacob. He said, "I would go backpacking in the mountains and I would spend my day canoeing on a river." So it sounds like the Everett region is a perfect home for you and a perfect place for you to relocate with your family and hopefully bring those kids to Everett Public Schools. When I asked Jacob why he chose Everett Public Schools, he responded with two phrases: progressive mindset and student-centered. So I want to welcome you, Jacob, and like I tell everyone, it's our job to help you be successful. So welcome to Everett Public Schools and especially Evergreen Middle School. So I welcome you. If you have any few words you'd like to share with our board.
I would just like to thank you for the opportunity to work in the Everett Public Schools. And I've just been here about 6 weeks, but I've been amazed by all the people that I've worked with and the amount of professionalism that I've experienced, and feel very fortunate to be here. So thank you very much.
I think we do a picture in front now.
That's what I was going to ask. Do a quick.
You're going to stay here and walk down. Just going to click that.
Great.
Welcome. Nice to meet you.
Welcome aboard.
Right here. We'll cover up that superintendent thing. Okay, that brings us to section 6.0, public comments. The school board sets aside 2 times during each regular board meeting to hear from our constituents. We do this because we value public input and would like to hear and understand the perspectives you bring to the table. Dr. Cohn, are there any public comments this evening?
We have one request yes, we have one request.
Okay. On behalf of the school board, I'd like to welcome you to this meeting. School board meetings are designed to conduct district business in public. We welcome ideas and opinions presented in that same spirit. I would like to share how this portion of the meeting is conducted. Or I could skip this part since I think you're kind of familiar with it. Is that okay? Okay, we're going to move on. Please introduce our speaker.
Okay, you have one request. It's from Jared Kink to talk with you about the upcoming year. Jared, I recognize here has filled out the form incorrectly. He's a resident of the district, a legal representative, district, students or parents, and he did not check the box, I'm going to do it for him, where it says he's a parent or guardian of a student enrolled at our schools. You have 3 minutes. You know how the drill works.
Thank you, school board. To our students and communities, Washington's Constitution has the strongest, most expansively inclusive education clause of any founding document in our country. As with many of our founding principles, these words point to a promise we are still working to make a reality. However, in the light of the recent national controversy over racial bigotry and hate, this promise to our state's children is as relevant and as essential today as it was in 1889. A commitment to equality for all children remains the foundation of our state's public school system. As educators serving our students and communities, we hold without reservation that all means all, each and every. As educators, we welcome all students back to school this year, as every year, with the knowledge that education is a civil right. Our purpose is to articulate and advance that right and the promise of a future of each and every student. We hold this to be true for all of our students, no matter where they may have been born, what language they might speak at home, what color or heritage or gender or faith or not, or learning need or ability. In Charlottesville, Virginia, and elsewhere, people have marched under the banners of movements and nations that espouse hatred and violence. By their own admission, they marched to normalize the ideas that have been defeated repeatedly at the ballot box and on the battlefield. Their purpose endangers the children and the communities we serve, and therefore we must oppose them absolutely. As educators, we reject these abhorrent ideologies and their histories of racial genocide, slavery, oppression, violence, and hatred. We reject the notion of sides in these matters as there is no place at the table of public discourse for those who support Nazism, anti-Semitism, white supremacy, or white nationalism, or who support violence against individuals based on gender identity or expression or sexual orientation. Their bigoted and hateful philosophy and actions stand in stark contrast with our Constitution's promise of a quality public education for all of Washington's children, whatever their race, color, caste, or sex. As educators, we're accomplices with our students in working to ensure that there's no place for hatred in our communities, our classrooms, or our hearts. As union members, we know that an injury to one is an injury to all. We are no less concerned by actions 1,000 miles away than we are those that happen in our own neighborhoods, and our own responsibility to respond in the same our responsibility to respond is the same. I represent the 1,200 members of the Everett Education Association, and we say with one voice, all are welcome, this is your classroom, this is your right. We have so much learning to do together, and it's going to be a great year. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. On behalf of the board, we appreciate it greatly. Okay. Next item of business is the consent agenda. Dr. Cohn, would you please provide an introduction to our consent agenda this evening?
The board's consent agenda includes repetitive business items. These include, for example, meeting minutes, personnel actions, expense vouchers, and recurring contracts. Sometimes the consent agenda will include items that occur less frequently, but are of a routine business nature. The less frequently occurring consent agenda items are usually reviewed by the board in its Friday report, 1 or more weeks prior to the board meeting when those items are scheduled to appear on the consent agenda. This gives directors time to ask staff questions about those items or to consider a discussion about the policy implications of those items. If a consent agenda item is removed by the concurrence of 2 directors, that item is placed in new business. We renumber the remaining items automatically, and the board votes on the consent agenda in a single motion. By their definition, consent agendas are not debatable. In the case of this consent agenda, the superintendent's office has not received any questions or comments regarding these items. Therefore, the consent agenda is presented as published, and we ask your approval thereof.
Great, thank you. A motion to adopt the consent agenda is in order.
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second?
It has been moved by Director Lassane and seconded by Director Mitchell to approve the consent agenda. Does any director wish to remove an item from the consent agenda and place it in new business section of the agenda? Hearing no requests, we move to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Motion carries. And that takes us to our superintendent report for the evening. Dr. Cohn.
All right, thank you very much. Well, this evening we've got a load of good things for you. I'm going to try to get through it in the time allotment, but I don't know, there's some things that you're probably going to want to hear more about. So this is a quick picture of what we're going to cover in this evening's superintendent report. And this is a picture, by the way, on the cover slide of staff and students from Evergreen Middle School getting together for a campus cleanup and to share very publicly their Timberwolf pride. I want to say that we put this in here specifically because it's representative of the incredible amount of work that's going on across the district to get every single school, all the grounds, all the instructional materials, and all the new computers that students are going to be using in place and ready for the first day. Several agenda highlights this evening. One, you're going to get to go through a second reading and a public hearing on the 27-18 budget. That includes the operating portion of the budget, all of the funds, the capital program, and this is the meeting at which we conduct that public hearing. We'll brief you on that as we get to that point in the agenda. You've got a legislative update. Mr. Moore has been working with his team to prepare a legislative update for you on the really significant impacts that are coming down the road for all the districts in Washington. And in our case, this looks at us in particular. And I think you're going to be, better informed, let's say that. We had some really wonderful experiences this summer. I think the one I'd like to highlight the most is 21 students graduating at our August ceremony here in the Community Resource Center. I'll tell you that I think it's the largest number. I don't know whether it is or not. It looked like the largest number of students we graduated in summer, and it certainly looked to me like the largest crowd we've had. And I have to tell you, people really, really enjoyed the setting and the fact that it was 85 degrees out there and about 70 or 68 in here. It really worked out very well, and we're very, very pleased and proud of those students. And we're grateful for all the parents and family who joined us. We got an incredible amount of learning activities going over the course of the summer. We've got 2,000 students experiencing summer school, about 1,100 elementary students, 400 middle school students, 600 high school students attended our summer school programs. And students were involved first through fifth grades from all 17 of the elementary schools and Port Gardner. They attended schools at Forest View, Lowell, Madison, Silver Lake, Whittier, and Woodside. And we had almost 200 staff helping out with that activity. I'm not sure I've got a slide in here about the adult learning. If I do, and I've forgotten, I apologize. We had hundreds and hundreds of people involved in a variety of activities that you're going to actually be hearing about in incredible depth on the 12th of September. But I have to tell you, Sally Lancaster was responsible for one of the elements of summer activities, and that was the new staff orientation. One of the things that we do is we ask staff to give us feedback, and we generally share that feedback with you. You get a lot of statistics about the average scores and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sally did a post-it comment, sort of an exit ticket sort of a deal. And there were some wonderful, wonderful comments. And I said, you got to share those tonight with the board members. So she brought a couple of Post-its to share with you. So go ahead, Sally, will you?
So
By the way, they're the good
103
ones.
new teachers, their prompt was to leave a question or a comment, and I thought we'd get a lot of questions. We had 3 questions and comments like, I'm learning and growing so much. I love that my students have a non-judgmental place to learn and grow. My last district did not provide training like this before school began. This will help relieve some of the stress of the new work environment. I'm super excited to be part of the Everett School District. Thank you. Everyone's been welcoming. I'm excited to be such this positive environment. Everyone's happy and friendly. I really appreciate the support. I appreciate how helpful and welcoming I'm feeling appreciated. And I wish I had started working in Everett Public Schools sooner. What a motivating team of people to work with. So clearly our values were evident for our new folks on day 2.
Thanks, Sally. And I want to thank Carol for standing in for the board at our new teacher institute. Carol was there along with the mayor of Mill Creek to welcome all of our new teachers. And they had, I think, a great couple of days. Actually, it was 3 days? 4 days. Next item, Stuff the Bus helps kids. We're going to provide 1,800 backpacks to start the school year. Our foundation has conducted their campaign, and they are going to distribute a huge number of those backpacks. And I want to have distributed. Thank you very much. I want to make sure that we take a moment to thank the foundation leadership and all the folks who contributed to the backpacks and all the folks who gave time to assembling those and putting the activity together. This is where I was going to have Sally stand up and talk about the incredible number of summer trainings that we've been doing. I knew it was in here somewhere, but I was afraid I dropped it. So, Sally, thank you very much for that. And Joyce is going to tell you as I said, on the 12th, about the incredible range of training activities this summer, which included, by the way, for the first time since anybody here can remember vividly, an institute for our paraeducators, which is part of that new contract that you approved. And we concentrated, I think, the training for special ed primarily that day. They were very, very appreciative of the time and the effort invested in that training activity. We had our custodians and our maintenance crew involved in a very significant training, and they got to engage in robotics, and they got to engage in a variety of other activities. We showed them some of the things that are going on in schools and let them choose among a variety of opportunities so they could get hands-on with some of the things that are cooking in schools. I spent about an hour with them, updating them on what's happening with the district, and as I did transportation, both our drivers and the Durham drivers. So we've been spending a lot of time with staff updating them on what's happening in the district as part of the immense summer training activities. We got one grant to let you know about that you just approved in the consent agenda. Snohomish County Council approved a grant to Forest View Elementary to provide accessible playground equipment. It was $8,500 and a little bit over $8,500 to provide some playground equipment for youngsters. These will be accessible by kindergarten life skills and extended resource room classes. And I want to extend a thank you to the county council members who continue to look out for the kids in their county and to look out for our kids in Everett Public Schools. A couple of construction updates. Yeah, I'll tell you what, in cabinet we went over about 20 slides, and I think we're giving you maybe 3. I don't know if we're going to get a chance for Mike to stand up. I got about 2 minutes and 57 seconds left. Summer projects across the district, too many to talk about tonight. We'll be giving you an update a little bit later on. This is a quick picture of portables. We added 9 this summer to manage growth, and we are very hopeful that it will be enough. This is a picture of the work at North Middle School. The modernization is underway. The library moved to a portable space, and we're using that library space for classrooms. The next picture is a picture of some of our summer projects. This happens to be a gateway roof replacement activity, the installation of an ADA ramp at Jefferson Elementary School, and Hawthorne's flooring replacement project. And Mike tells me when you walk into Hawthorne Elementary School, it's going to feel totally different. It's amazing what updating your floor covering can do for you. Our maintenance projects touch every single school in the district. This year, I asked that we triple the size of our grounds crew, and we added some to the other crews who were working. And of course, we had to increase the number of youngsters that we brought in because of all the instructional materials that needed to be unpacked, scaled, if you will, distributed, all kinds of work related to the instructional materials, plus all the instructional technology that we were doing. So we had a lot of high school students and former graduates working with us, and we're very pleased. We employed 25 college-age summer work folks to help with electrical grounds, HVAC, painting, delivery, et cetera, et cetera. 15 were dedicated to grounds because we're trying to catch up from those lean years. July is not a really big month for school visits. This is where most of our, yeah, I know, probably I should have cut this one, huh? Is where most of our training went. So now if we were looking at this month, I could show you some more, but we're not. We won't look at that till September. So I spent most of the time that we were here in July at Eisenhower and Evergreen, which is where our work was done. Did have a few community visits during the course of July, and these are the list of folks that I touched base with in a community visit sort of a fashion. You've got a special school board meeting coming up on August 31. That's tomorrow. We got Labor Day coming up. The first day of school is September 6th, and you have a regular school board meeting then coming up in September. And that concludes the superintendent's report tonight with 24 seconds left. Thank you very much.
Excellent job. Thank you. You can breathe now.
Okay.
Okay. I think actually a lot of people assume that not much happens over the summer because we don't have kids in school, and I think you probably cut about 2/3 of your slides for that presentation, so maybe we can catch a few more at our next meeting. Okay, tonight, Section 9.0 Strategic Progress Monitoring, we do not have a report because Section 10.0 Information Discussion, Jeff Moore is going to provide us a fairly detailed explanation, help us untangle some of those decisions that were made in one of, I believe, the longest legislative session in Washington's history. So you're going to clarify everything for us, right? Yeah. No.
That's what our fan club hopes, right, Jerry?
Please share with us what we know at this point.
Okay. First of all, it's been, I think it's easy to understate the complexity of what's going on, and this is sort of the first brush at trying to unravel the multiple number of variables that have changed in our world, understanding the significance of what happened in those last few weeks with 8 individuals, 4 from the House and 4 from the Senate, and coming together with a deal, you know, at the last few hours of June 30th. And so districts across the state, I would say, have been, each and every one of them has a different set of variables that affects them differently. So when you see something in one of the newspapers about Tacoma or Olympia, their story's a little different. So what we're going to focus on tonight is the Everett story, and focus on it in that as information unfolds, we're going to keep having this conversation. In fact, I was just thinking, Director Mitchell, about the WASDA conference coming up and wondering how they're going to have priorities prepared in this amount of time when people are still trying to sort through this. And you're probably seeing that same conversation occur. So tonight we are going to look at the revenue, we're going to talk about what we believe is the insufficient response to McCleary, and what we're hoping that through different avenues that our court continues to monitor this case and continues to help bring clarity and resolution to some of the issues that were caused as a result of this session. We're going to talk about the consequences and the inequities of the enrichment levy and the levy swap that was passed. We're also going to talk about how the enrichment levy rules impacts compensation. And finally, or not finally, we're going to talk about a snapshot of looking at over time how we start out with what appears to be a workable solution, but over time districts really begin to be greater impacted in years 3, 4, and 5, depending on who you are. We're going to consider the implications of a K3 class size reduction, and finally kind of give you an update on what occurred with the categorical programs. I did bend my glasses today, so if you're wondering why they're crooked, that actually wasn't today. I know that, but don't let that be a focal point. So So here's the 4 significant areas that we've identified and tried to communicate with our associations where the legislature fell short. First and foremost, the legislative outcome ignored special education, and the mechanisms they put in place did not improve the safety net program. And so we continue to look at meeting what we're bound to by state and federal laws and providing a level of service that's right for our students. And next year, we anticipate about a $10 million shortfall. You'll see how that is mitigated a little bit later on in the presentation, but that is a significant underfunding or ignored element of it. The second is that the new enrichment levy formulas really exacerbate the inequities. Before, we talked about grandfathered levy status, and some districts having 37%. Others like us having 28%, and this one actually widened the gap by the methodology they used. Finally, the significant shift in how the state funds compensation created winners and losers. I think rural districts who don't have the higher local compensation packages ended up more favorable than us in the Puget Sound area. We'll take a look at that. And finally, the capital budget, as we know, did not pass. It's being held hostage, and we know that along with that, we have state matching funds that are not being followed through. And then they also ignored the duty, kind of the paramount duty, to provide any construction funding for K-3. So special education shortfalls, we've talked about this in the past, and we've used this slide moving forward. You can anticipate that the next year we would see about a $10 million revenue shortfall. And I said we deliver by the metrics of the state and our evaluation a highly efficient, and we provide efficient services. And so historically, when they capped the special education funding, it's been at 12.7% of your overall enrollment. We've generally worked within the 11.5 to 11.8%. So we've been deemed efficient not only in terms of performance, but in terms of how we're delivering our services to our kids. The state increased that to 13.5%. So in essence, what that does, it rewards districts who are less efficient, but it really provides no added funding for Everett. So, you know, there are circumstances where you're anomalies where you do have a higher enrollment, but if we're trying to focus on efficiency and the efficient uses of public dollars, we think that that helps some districts, but it certainly doesn't help those that are moving forward. And as you can see, I mentioned before that we have about a $10 million shortfall estimated for next year. We've talked about this slide in the past, what it takes to qualify for safety net funding. And clearly, after you have state and federal funding, this is an average kid, you have to invest enrichment levy dollars, what we'll call it now, into that student before you're eligible for safety net. And districts clearly argue that educating a special education student is a basic education responsibility, and we're prohibited from using enrichment levy dollars on basic education. Therefore, how can you leave us with this gap moving forward? Now, the state did require that OSPI formulate a safety net committee to look at the mechanism, but they provided no funding for statewide to cover this gap of what districts must invest to educate that student. So in terms of the special education argument, those are kind of the key points. I think you're familiar with them. And what some of our conversations are is there a way that, is it permissible to use enrichment levy dollars to cover this gap? If not, what do we do? So we're still waiting on more of an official answer in terms of that. The enrichment levy itself, as I mentioned during the agenda review, I'm trying to be long-handed so those who view this can understand more complete sentences than just short bullets. But for 30 years, we've called it the maintenance and operation levy in statute. And we've worked with our local county prosecutors, and our ballot issues generally try to communicate what it really does. And so generally we've called it education programs and operations levy. And the whole time it's been intended for enrichment. And part of the court's case was you're spending that on basic education. So the rules surrounding the maintenance and operations levy are the same in essence philosophically as the enrichment levy. It's just that now they're being very overt about honoring that law that has been neglected for quite some time, or that part of our Constitution. Equally over that time, we know that the levy's gone from 10% up to 24% for many years, and then in 2009, I believe, they raised it to 28% due to the state funding shortfalls. So that 28% has been in place, and we've known it's been a levy cliff. The current system, and as I mentioned before, it had great inequities. But what the levy did allowed locally is it did tend to grow from 4 to 6% a year, and what that allowed districts to do is to keep pace with rising costs locally that the MSOC generally didn't fund, and our local commitments to our bargaining partners. And what we found with this session is that 4.6% has now been capped at the implicit price deflator. And the implicit price deflator is a number that really is based upon the gross national product. And the scale of it, I'll show you in a minute, is lower than the CPI. So if you're going to try to reserve and save funding from the state, then you cap us at a model that doesn't even keep up with inflation, which is what we believe they've done. But certainly we've lost ground over time on how our local community can support our levies. So as I mentioned, they've renamed the maintenance and operation levy to the enrichment levy. We're going to have conversations with our local prosecutor about, we used to call it replacement levy for educational programs and operations. Do we call it replacement enrichment levy for educational program? We have to go through the nuances of what that might mean. They also mandated a new accounting structure to track the levy. Without a clear definition of basic education and without a salary allocation model, OSPI is perplexed in working with the State Accounting Committee on how to create a structure. We know it'll take a year to understand and develop it, and then implementing it by next year would be the earliest, and then creating some accountability where you can audit it would have to occur the year after that. So we're walking into a world where we're going to have to start aligning how we code our staff starting next year, and we're going to have to figure out how to blend in how we code our staff within that new accounting structure. And they only provide a vague guidance on how you can spend local enrichment dollars. And you can see it's sort of what you would think in terms of a language of curriculum act, or as you can see, extracurricular extended days and in extended school years, additional course offerings beyond the minimum instructional program, additional salary costs attributed to the provision or administration of these enrichment activities allowed under the subsection, and activities associated with early learning, and then anything else that OSPI thinks that aligns with this. So OSPI is working with school districts, and we're trying to communicate to them what we think it should include without any clear definition of basic education. So we talked about the formula. It's the lesser of two. We've heard back in the levy swap conversations in the years past this idea of either going with something based upon assessed property value or something based upon the number of dollars per student. And we've always communicated the assessed property value, that's inequitable, obviously, because AV is so widely ranged. The per pupil is more equitable in terms of the dollar amounts you can assess, but those districts that can't fully access that amount fall short. So the good news is that with that, and this diagram down here will show you, they did put in unless sort of a floor. So if you as a district can't collect $1,500 per student, then when the state does its statewide property tax, they'll make you whole to $1,500. So what that does, you can see that the inequities here is that Bellevue could probably collect $41.84, and this is today dollars. So if you take it forward, these numbers are bigger. So they're capped at $2,500 from what they could collect based upon their AV, whereas Everett and Sunnyside are in more of the we're capped at $1.50. So what that says is we cannot go out to our voters above $1,500 or $1.50. Or the $1,500 because we're slightly below $1,500. So Bellevue, with the same number of students, can collect $20 million more than Everett. And so that's one of the inequities that we're trying to make clear, and I think Senator Rolfes even acknowledged it. I don't know to what extent, but one of our initial is we get that you want the $1.50 so that you can limit the state's exposure to making people whole, but if a district's be able to collect above that, we shouldn't artificially be capped by that double standard. So the inequity from what was our difference from Bellevue, about 12 million, is now 20 million. How do we get our levy ready to go to the voters on February 18th? The OSPI, beginning in levies collected in 2019, must approve an enrichment levy expenditure plan. So even though we don't have an accounting system, we don't know what OSPI is going to define in terms of allowable expenses, we have got to put together a plan in a hurry. And we pulled a number of districts. There's a lot of districts going out in February, so we're trying to understand what the plan will look like. How do we put it together for 4 years? How do we provide flexibility? OSPI, once we submit it, has 30 days to respond. So we know that we have to put a resolution into the county on December. And we know we need to back that up, and we need you to approve a levy resolution in November, which means that we need to get something to OSPI by late September in order for them to approve it within their 30 days so we can bring you a resolution that's acceptable with that. There is some concurrence that can occur, but realistically, you have to know what we're going to put before the voters before you can act. So we're still trying to figure out with OSPI, what is a levy plan? Is it 6 broad categories? What's the level of detail? How do we provide flexibility? Because it requires each year in the future, any deviation from that can be adopted within the annual budget process, but we're still trying to figure out with them what exactly and when we can submit it, and we have this mental date of the end of September to try to put that together. Everything good so far? I mean, understandable. So, no? Okay, stable
That was an answer to good, not understandable.
Okay, good. Okay, stable tax rate commitment. We've prided ourselves and had a long-standing commitment to our stable tax rate. And what we've generally done when we describe that, we talk about sort of the 3 legs of the capital stool, as you might say it. One of them is our existing bond debt and future bond debt. I guess you could call it 4. You got bond debt, you got a capital levy, which we're using for technology and building improvements. And then we've got our M&O, or our Educational Programs and Operations levy. So generally, when we went to our constituents, we talked about a number around 586, and we said we can commit this over time. We had some prior year assessments, and it went up to 588 that they reassessed. But nevertheless, what we committed to with our long-term plan is a line that followed along right at the 586 level. So by the state now taking our M&O levy and in essence cutting it in half down to $1.50, that whole debt structure drops. And so when I've made comments before, in essence, our commitment could still be met with, you could have a greater bond capacity, but then you have to take into consideration, we never have talked about the state property tax because it's been a consistent pipeline. It goes straight to the state. Now they intertwine. Now they're very interrelated. The levy swap, we have to communicate in a different way about what the tax implications are for our constituents, because the state tax went up and we have to look at the net change between state and local. And the next slide, that's a slide that shows you, by doing so, that 568 commitment is really down at 495. So this was based upon a $250 million bond, and so there's some headroom to go higher in terms of a net commitment to our constituents. But when you add in the state tax, what this shows is back when we did the 568 or 586, we had this total tax rate combined state and local, when you look at your tax statement at home, of 591. Well, what they did is they didn't drop our levy until calendar year 2019, but they imposed the state tax increase in 2018. So in 2018, our current levy will be at its current rate that's already set by board resolution, and it will be a part of our budget. But the state tax will also be implemented. So our constituents are going to feel a spike. And then the following year, the total rate drops. And so within this set, we have to look at how big of a levy we assess, how big of a bond you may or may not decide to put on the ballot, and communicate it in terms of the total tax rate.
Question. Can I ask you a question? So would it be your assessment that we have a limited window to look at a levy based on this slide?
I think I'll answer that a little bit. I think, yes, we have a very limited window to consider what our levy would look like if we, in the key component I'll show you in a couple of minutes is, if the legislature relieves the $1.50 cap on us in the next session, we won't know until we've already filed the resolution. So the quandary that we may be facing, and I don't know if that's here, is do we actually go out for somewhere near $2,500 a student, create a levy plan that's associated with it? I think you'll see the need why we need to do that, because otherwise we're going to be in a deficit situation and believe that the legislature is going to respond in some way. So when we look at other districts, they're going to create enough capacity for what can happen in the next session, or for that matter, in the next biennium, because the impacts start hitting us a couple of years down the road. Does that answer your question? Yes, in a short period of time before you adopt a resolution, we need to sort some of this out. So we're going to talk a little bit about compensation and how it relates to the local levy. Here's what I talked about. They eliminated the salary allocation model, but they've asked OSPI to create a salary grid for districts to consider. So in our meeting with OSPI, what they'll likely do is they'll take the, in fact, they are bringing together the compensation local technical working group from 2010, update the same report, and provide a narrow salary grid. But there's no impetus, and there's probably no good reason for to push people onto something that crosswalks is at a level of complexities where staff may or may not get paid the same thing they are now. So you have to kind of look at it and say, what's the starting point? Well, the starting point is total compensation by employee in 2017 and 18. And that's where we know they are and will be, and what they're taking home and what's supporting their family. And the following year, we're going to have to figure out how do we readjust this. So the second thing here is they cut the state mix factor. So you'll see in a later slide that we're at 1.53 is like the statewide average. So they're going to say, what's the average experience in every teacher in the state? And we're going to use that for everybody. So if you have more experienced teachers, you're going to get less money. If you have less experienced teachers, you're going to get more money. The next thing they did is that we're going to bring this compensation into you.
Could you explain that over again, please?
So right now, the state salary grid, multiple channels, you'll see it in a minute, I'll flash to it. State salary grid right here on the left, local salary grid over here for base. They look at and they scatter people on this salary grid, and there's a middle point where there's an average, and it's your mix factor. How experienced are your teachers on this grid? And then the statewide average is, if you think that cell 0 is 1.0, and I think that this cell down here, 67,000, is like 1.88. So somewhere in the middle, the experiences of your teacher derive a mix factor, and that modifies your funding either up and down based upon your experience. So it makes your salaries match what your teachers are being paid. Well, in this case, if you have more experienced teachers, like Everett, and Olympia has even more, we've had a lot of retirements. A few years ago, our mix factor was up 1.62 or something. A lot of retirements were down about 1.59, but with 1,100 teachers, you're going to get less funding because they're only going to pay us as if we're at 1.53. Somebody like Renton, so they're 1.48. they'll get more funding than they have now based upon that. So that's one of the kind of the funding plays. The other thing is the regionalization factor. So if I go back here, they looked at,
So I just want to make sure that we've covered that concept
Okay.
because it is one of the most critical concepts in the legislative change. There was a move, and frankly, it was driven to some degree by a number of districts with more youthful teachers, with less education, who would, as a result of this formula, because they were reimbursed for teachers who cost less, would receive less money, made an argument that that was inequitable. And frankly, the Seattle Times championed that argument extensively during the legislative process. So we are moving to then a structure where by some other formula you get money, you have to bargain a salary schedule, and it doesn't respond to the changes in your teacher experience level and education structure. Personally, I think it is a terrible, terrible change in the structure. So I want to make sure that you're clear about what happens. There's a lot more to it, but I want to make sure that the essence of that move is very clear, and it harms districts with more senior staff.
Amount in which you start.
There were other changes of that nature. Jeffrey's going to go into a lot of those, but at the base, at the vortex of this issue, is that mix factor that basically says, oh, these are the teachers you've got. We mathematically reduce it to a factor to be able to drive out then wages that reimburses you for the teachers who you've hired. Okay? They're not going to do that anymore. Thanks.
thank you. One of the other inequities that benefits Everett compared to other districts is the regionalization factors. So oftentimes people have thought, well, if you have a statewide contract, for example, you have to have different cost of living influences. And if you're rural, it's hard to get it as a teacher. And if you live here in the urban areas, it's hard to afford. So how they decided what districts placed on what level, in essence, you get a 6% increase in one area, a 12%, an 18%, and then for some districts like Everett, who are grandfathered in the salary schedule, they gave us a 24% increase. So you'll see the mathematical analysis of this start us at 24% in terms of our staff funding, but by 2021-22, we actually phased down to 18%. So what that's sort of saying is, once you give us the new increase based upon the IPD, which is generally around, as you can see, below 2%, at the same point in time, we're going to be decreasing our funding by 2%. So we're going to be held flat in terms of salary funding through 2022 before you see any new state funding other than related to more FTE. So that's one of their major concerns right there. What the state did is, and I think that's the third bullet, is they did increase the minimum teacher pay from $35,700 to $41,000 or $45,000, but over the biennium they're doing it in two steps. So in the first year we're getting only half of the new compensation while our levy has dropped, and they're relying upon our old levy rate to do that. So when you look at this, just know there's two steps in how state funding is going to increase related to salaries, and it happens over a 2-year period. So what do we do as we move forward? As I mentioned, we have to start and assume, okay, every individual, and I think that the common understanding is we have to start with the baseline of where we are. So what we're going to do is, at one point in time, we're going to have to combine those two salary schedules together and say, here's where we're starting from. Here's where our staff are upon them. The interesting thing is there's a common understanding that going forward, we will continue to look at moving people based upon their years of service and their continuing credits. When the state eliminated the salary schedule, They basically eliminated the need for us to do an S275. We don't even have to report experience or yearly credits, but we're going to need to account for them, because without a salary allocation model, they're just telling us an average. They're saying, here's your funding model, now go teach. So the systems that could provide more efficiency are really relevant and important, and they will continue to exist, and we'll continue to track them. And we're walking in time with our labor partners trying to figure out, what does this all mean? We're hoping that the WEA and are confident are coming up with a consistency in their approach, so things aren't different from district to district. Can you imagine 295 salary schedules, and you want to go to a different district, and you're trying to figure out how much you're going to get paid? And so the other thing about this is, in the past, you had a base salary schedule and you had a tri-salary schedule, and they created a total compensation. I think I have that box next. I'm going to switch to that. In the past, in essence, no, I'm not. I should follow my own thinking, because that's the way I wrote it. The second thing is, there's some language within it that talks about you cannot pay an educator more than their hourly rate, their hourly rate under basic education. Well, they're exempt employees. There is no actual contract day, just like any other exempt employee. So how do we develop an hourly rate? And then the second assumption is, then you have to look at things that they do for enrichment that are related to time and say, well, now we have to compare that. So we have to develop what they're going to do and how much time is going to do that. But within the language, they didn't take away the language around responsibility or incentive. So while some people think, well, try one away, it really didn't, because they didn't eliminate that. And we're trying to understand to what extent is the expectation that we tie the activities or what we're paying staff to do in the enrichment levy to time. We don't know that. We're talking with our councils are talking to each other. We think that enrichment and responsibility still exists. So while we have two different definitions, we had the maintenance and operation levy and the base salary schedule. Now we have a basic education salary schedule and an enrichment salary schedule. It's moving the line, and that's what this next diagram is. We assume that if you're going to have status quo and we're going to pay those individuals the same, the amount of funding, the 28% that was paid for out of the educational programs and operation levy, that the net difference is the enrichment levy. And what used to be one contract that covered both of those activities, we're required to have two separate contracts. So the vast majority of all employees in the district who are on contract will sign two contracts. It's likely all of us here will sign two contracts. And it's certain that all of our educators will sign two contracts. Other anomalies are the state funding allows you to pay teachers associated with STEM 10% more than the other educators. But it's not like a national board cert where if you have STEM qualified teachers, that means you get 10% more funding. No, it's out of the same allocation, which means if you were to do that, in essence, you'd have to lower all the other educators. We don't know how the WA is responding to that, but that is sort of one of those examples. They also cut funding for master's degrees, which we have 790 educators on master's degrees. So we have to figure out, well, where are we going to come up with the 3.2 million? Do we take it out of that same pot of money? We have to address that. And as I mentioned, I'm using the certificated side because we have the same sort of things to sort through on the classified side. Are we good to keep going? So let's talk about the revenue story. The revenue story, I think OSPI clarified it. The state was making statements that we've invested $7.2 million, but they didn't back out the local revenue. So when you take out kind of the funding loss, there's a $5.6 million, $5.6 billion total investment. You know, back when, I think when Randy Dorn submitted a plan, it was really not about 2.3 million a year by the time it got together. When they calculated what it would cost to do 1351, it was over 4 billion a year. So in terms of metrics to the past, it doesn't really pass a litmus test that there's all that new funding. And then I know that this is difficult to see, and I'll show you the next slide, but what this is intended to say is when you look at the state's calculations about new revenue, and I'll show you that slide in a minute, it's looking at the difference between our apportionment this year and 2018-19. And it's including the investment for next year, which we know there's no new money for educators next year other than the 2.3% COLA. Other than the state had underfunded retirement rates, so they significantly increased retirement rates. That has to come to the district, and it turns around and goes back to the state. So these light blue areas are really talking about COLA, healthcare benefits they increased, because they're starting to ratchet them up, because if we go to 7, it's going to cost them more. That's probably why they waited that long. So it's flow-through funds, and it's being counted as new revenue. The second thing are really good programs. K-3 class size, high poverty, down below, 1.2 million more in LAP. And it's wonderful because it's really prescriptive, and it has to be used at high 50% or greater poverty schools. But it's coming in and it's tied to expenses. So it's not new revenue, and it's helping kids. But the core of what we do is sort of being left out. And there's an implication that we can cut your levy because we're giving you this new funding. Yeah, but the new funding has a specific purpose, and it is a good purpose, and it is helping kids that are on the outside of what we normally do, or at least enriching that program. But it's still not helping us with the overall erosion that occurs with our general operations and that relationship between salaries for basic education and levy. And so this next slide would say that realistically, of all this new funding that you're going to count, almost 16 million, and you'll see later, I want you to remember that number, 16 million, only 400,000 of it is MSOC. Only 400,000 of it is free for us to spend. But I can quite guarantee you that our operating costs are going to go up for more than 400,000. So from our perspective, this 16 million they're giving us next year doesn't even count, because that's just status quo. Other than the fact that we are grateful to have more K-3 class size with no classrooms to put the kids in, but the money's there if we can find places to put the kids. And that's another story we'll talk about in a minute. I think I'm going long, but I'm trying to make sure that it's thorough. If you want me to speed up, please let me know. All right, I didn't even see the clock. Oh, okay. So this is the overall study, and here's what I'm trying to say. When I said to you, remember that 16 million, if you look at the net revenue down here, they're saying, okay, well, you're going to get 29 or 28 million more. Or 35 million, whichever number, but you got to knock that 16 million off it right away. And then you start looking at, okay, what are some of the implications? Well, K-3 class size, if we're not able to build the classrooms and put the students, then we lose another 7 million. So you start kind of pulling those things off, and you get to the kind of whittling it down, what we're trying to do with this presentation is show, let's take a look at what the enrichment levy is. Oh, let me talk about this slide too. This is one that Seattle sort of created, and I think there's some confusion, and I just want to make sure the basis for this, because what we're saying here and what the OSPI, what this is compared to, for example, this is compared to a local levy of 51 million for 16-17. And really, as levies has grown, that's not our 28%, that's 25%. And so what districts are saying is you have to look at what we were allowed to collect. So our number is probably more near 60 million. And so they're starting us with what we can actually collect in this fiscal year, not in terms of what the lid is with the levy authority. So this diagram equalizes that. And it begins to build in the assumption that for the first few years, yes, in fact, state funding exceeds what we would have collected, not by a great deal, but the funding per student is more for the first 3 years. But with the IPD cap, with those other measures, with the back out of regionalization, it becomes less. So we end up with a funded system that's lower than what it was with the 28% levy rolling forward in time. And so many districts are aligning around this to communicate it's not what we're actually getting, it's what statute is, and because we're suffering as a result of that. This particular diagram was taking from that other diagram, looking at what, in fact, I'll show you here. I'm sorry to go back. But right here, we know that the state is estimating we're below that 1,500. So they're providing local effort assistance in those years. So we know from their calculations and whatever AVs they use, they assume by probably 21, 22, we'll be at 1,500 and we won't have LEA anymore. But when you combine those two numbers, that's what you can spend in terms of an enrichment levy. So these numbers up here at the top are that combined total over time. And you can see that our levy declines. What we did is we looked at all of our staff. We looked at what the state funding formula did, looking down below at the regionalization factor. And we realized that over time, we have had a consistent 3.5% commitment increase over a number of years. And when you look at for classified teachers, for certificated teachers, and in other words, we look at what happens if our labor, as it has historically done, continues to follow the same pace. So we have the same number of people, we give them that cost of living increase. What it nets out to be is that when you just take that away from the levy, here's how much enrichment levy you have left. And then you start looking at what's that special education shortfall? Well, let's give the state credit because they gave us more for salaries. We're going to lower that TRI obligation. And then you say, okay, well, we've got ALE that's that we overfund, or I'm sorry, it costs us more than what we're funded. And then you look at what it costs us for activities and athletics, and you can see right away that our levy won't cover our costs. There's some things that can be do plus and minus here. We haven't looked at what, for example, we're getting additional funding for professional development days that we already pay for out of our contract. That would make it look better, but there's other elements that can impact us that can make this more grim. The point of this is not to be reconciled to something, is to communicate that over time, the enrichment levy is impacting Everett. It has to do with a number of factors. One of the big ones is this regionalization factor. The other one is capping our levy artificially low and not letting it grow. So we're walking through time with raising costs and not increasing resources. I'll move rather quickly. I think you're pretty familiar with this one. I think the important thing to point out is that 17-1 ratio drives about 54 educators, and 17-1 is a student-teacher ratio. We really, when you get down to it and you're able to put all the educators to support our kids, the class size on average would probably be about 20.5 to meet 17-1. And for this year, we're provided the funding, and we have a year to figure out where to put these kids. We also know that kids don't arrive in even groups of 20, so there's going to be up and down in terms of what those classes are. You might see some at 17, you might see some at 22, because we need to balance it across the system. So even if, we had the state of the school reviews and they said, we want math specialists at all of our elementary, and it's a good strategic thing to do. It's the right thing to do and we invest in those and we're hiring next year, and they don't have additional classroom, our constituents aren't going to see class size go down. But we're going to have added 17 educators. It's going to help students, but if they're moving around and using groups of students, other things might be team teaching, but we're still 36 classrooms or portables short for next year, and we begin to lose that K-3 funding. So we can count on 18-19 coming up with a strategy, either having classrooms or having a reduced level of funding, what we'll have for 17-18. Make sense? I'm almost done, believe me. So career and technical education gets sort of a reinvestment. Over time, districts have used 15% allowable of the indirect to cover operations to kind of decide more freely about how they use it. State wants us to commit only 5% for that purpose and reinvest the 10% into CTE. It's really good for our program. It's really good for what we're trying to do. It gives us new money. But it means it leaves a hole in basic education. So right now we're looking at about a $700,000 hole maybe for 18-19 that we need to sort out, or actually for 17-18. For 17-18 we have a $700 hole, so we're kind of make some readjustments there. The other thing is they did provide additional LAP funding, and I mentioned 50%, and they increased funding for categorical programs. So all of this is good. Our challenge for that same central pot is the CTE indirect and how we make adjustments for that. You can see that they also lowered class sizes, which again, we haven't evaluated effectively how to do that. So in a nutshell, I think a lot of content, and this is just sort of scratching the surface to give you an idea of how important it is for us as a state, as a WA, as associations, to be following a constant path. And a lot of meetings are going on. We're trying to all work together. It benefits us, and we have to have those answers for the levy before we really know the end result. So clearly, we're going to be having more dialogues. I hope that brings you up to speed with a very complex legislative session. And know that as you ask us questions, we're going to turn around and ask OSPI. We're all trying to provide as many answers as we can when they're available. So we'll take note of what your questions might be. But that is our presentation.
Thank you. That was a lot of information and a lot of unanswered questions right now, unfortunately. So I am certain directors have questions because there's a lot of detail in there. And I'd like to start to my left with Director Wenta, if you have any questions. And, you know, I would just say to the directors that there's a lot here and there's a lot we don't know. And some of this is going to, you know, play out in the coming weeks and months, maybe years. So as much as we can, keep the questions specific and not brief, but we probably have more than we have time for tonight if we really wanted to delve into it. So,
Thank you. What has been the reception by our bargaining units as they've seen this?
I don't think I can answer that question.
What has been the reception by our,
Yeah, we're just beginning to engage with our associations about the impact.
and, you know, the messaging is just everything on all this. And my fear is that for the average voter, they're going to think that the educational funding shortfall has been solved, and how do you message that? So I'll be brief.
you can ask as many questions you need to
I'm
ask,
good.
please.
I'm good.
Go ahead.
My question is something that we've been struggling with for such a long time. And where we talk about basic education, or the definition of basic education, was anything done to look at what the definition of basic education is and how so much new enrichment that we've been doing lately has now become basic education, and what is that going to mean?
I think that the state, fortunately, the state did keep a prototypical school model. So that gives us sort of potentially a starting point of what you fund you consider to be basic education, and it's X number of teachers, and the next teacher or the next classified after that can be funded with the enrichment levy because it's above and beyond. They eliminated the salary schedule, so that doesn't really help us understand that. And they didn't provide a definition of basic education. They just provide us that vague list of things you can spend an enrichment levy on. So there's a big void between how do we work as a consistent 295 districts with OSPI and with their labor partners to understand what basic education is.
Right. When you've told me that Bellevue can collect more dollars in the long run, they essentially will have a lot more leeway to determine what is that basic education that they're going to provide their students than other districts that do not have the money? Or are you telling me that that money that Bellevue will collect, the state will take it away and give it to property poor districts?
There's two parts to that. The first part is the state property tax. And so for property-rich districts, their taxes are going to go up, and they're going to be redistributed throughout the state. So the homeowner in Bellevue is going to see a property tax increase, where the homeowner in Everett is going to see a slight decrease relative to the state property tax. And then that additional revenue is going to be able to help people get to that 1,500. So from a Bellevue perspective, the thing that people in property with lower assessed values, I won't say property poor, they've been paying that $2 a thousand for years, and Bellevue's may go from, this is just a number, 40 cents to 60 cents because of the assessed value, but it is a property increase. And so from that perspective, you're going to read where, wow, our property tax is going up and we're sending it throughout the state. But in terms of, it is a more equitable way for a family, no matter where you live, to get state funding to help your kid in your district. So there is some, you could call it a Robin Hood effect there that's positive. In terms of their local levy, we're all going to have the same definition. It just means they can have more enrichments. We may be able to try to just to cover what we're doing today, maybe some cuts. They can probably continue to do a 7-period a day. They can probably do early learning. So some of these things in our strategic plan, without additional funding, it becomes more and more challenging for us to accomplish them. And instead, we may be going the other direction. So I'm hopeful that this inequity is going to be seen. And then what we're faced with is, okay, how much do we ask for? And that's something we need to think about. So I hope that answered your question.
It did. Thank you.
I don't really have specific questions because it's all very confounding. But isn't the Supreme Court still supposed to rule on whether the legislators did what they asked them to, and if they should find that they didn't, you know what happens next?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I think 2 years ago, the ruling occurred in early September. I'm not sure, and Dr. Cohen, I don't know if you've heard when we might anticipate a court ruling. Certainly.
We know when the arguments occur, but we don't have a specific, they don't give you a specific date they'll rule.
We're hopeful there's some pressure to keep looking at this and resolve it, really, when you look out in the out years in particular and rebalance. But it's certainly, if they didn't take this step, we wouldn't have a starting point. We'd still be doing what we've been. We just got to build it better. We've got to communicate. We've got to help the system improve. We are where we are, and that's what we're all going to advocate for once we figure out what we're advocating for.
It's just so frustrating that so much time and effort has gone into this, and then you continue to put time and effort into all these complexities and uncertainties, and it's just frustrating, for everyone.
We did receive an inquiry from one of our legislators who passed on to us a message from House leadership that, let me see if I can find this really quickly for you, that indicates that a number of school districts have raised concerns related to the amount of funding provided under the McCleary legislation. And that districts are doing their own analysis and believe their district will receive less under the new legislation compared to what they were anticipating they'd receive under the prior law. The House Majority Leader indicates that that they're taking the concerns really seriously, and they're working with budget staff as well as OSPI to determine why the budget numbers that they were relying on during the negotiations appear to be different from the numbers local districts and OSPI are relying on for their independent analysis. And they hope to have a clear picture of the data and the reasons for the differences within the next couple of weeks. One of our representatives has asked us for our take on that, and we'll be getting together with him as soon as he's available once we completed this presentation for you, so that we can share what we're seeing in the way of differences in the numbers the state's sharing with us versus what we believe to be our reality here locally and what we get from OSPI. So it's an issue that clearly is elevating with regard to the attention of legislative leadership. which I think Jeff's earlier comment alluded to. Whether they're going to be willing to fix all the problems right away, really good question. We've been told that, there are legislators who are saying, we solved it, it's done. We don't want to talk about it anymore. And I think we know for a fact that they're not done. The problem's not solved. And I think all you have to do is start with special education, and you know that that's the case. Then you get into all the other things that are much more complex because the numbers aren't quite as immediately evident. So we'll be meeting with legislators here over the next several weeks to help them understand what our what our data tells us and why we think we're headed for a little bit of a train wreck downstream. Some are reaching that point much more quickly than we are, with different circumstances. That factor that was put in place to accommodate the different salary structures across the state is helping us not reach that point as quickly as others.
Exactly.
And so my question sort of goes along with that. I agree with confounding and frustrating. I concur, I should say. So thank you, Carol. And I appreciate your comments, Dr. Cohn, that they are looking at this because they are hearing things. Can you just clarify for me, the upcoming short session is not a budget session, but if they do hear from us and lots of districts what's happened with our levy authority, the local information about districts, because I appreciate the fact that a Bellevue homeowner might be paying a same tax rate as an Everett homeowner. That might be equitable, but a child in Bellevue will be getting a different quality of education than a child in Everett, and that's unacceptable. But would they be able to, in the upcoming session, re-look at levy caps at local earning ability that doesn't come right out of the state budget? Is that something that only would happen in a budget year, or is that something that could happen in an off year? Where they could adjust
They can change the budget or statutes in the short years. That's they're required to put the biennial budget in place in the long year.
Oh, okay.
The shorter sessions is generally to fix the things that didn't go right or that have come up subsequently.
Okay, so it could be a long short session.
Definitely could be. The longest short session on record, yeah, it's entirely possible. I think the worry for us right now is that session starts in January, and you have to approve a resolution to put a levy on the ballot.
On the ballot or not.
And potentially a bond.
And a bond, yes, if you're in February.
And educating to people that they're going to have a property tax spike in 18 and they're going to be voting in 18, but our levy isn't going to take effect until 19 when there'll be a drop. And I'm sorry. That's
It's
Very confusing.
It's not. It doesn't rise to the heights of the greatest simplicity that we've ever seen. So I think Ted framed it very well. We're very, very concerned because our community is likely to have heard a message from legislators, probably not our own. Problem solved, McCleary's done. And that absolutely is not our truth.
Yeah.
It is absolutely not our truth. Not only that, folks who know this business have said, why did they call it an enrichment levy? People will think that it's not necessary, when it absolutely is necessary. So we clearly have some hills to climb that have been laid out for us by our legislature. Not necessarily our legislators here per se, but by the legislature. So, at the same time, they've made progress in a number of areas over the past couple of years. We don't want to diminish that. My goodness, the professional development that we told you about this summer, the transportation funding, the gains that they made, we want to make sure we thank them for and appreciate.
Right.
We're very concerned that this could end up tipping a lot of that upside down for all the reasons that Jeff's laid out for you. Good enough for an update?
I have a
Okay.
couple questions or maybe comments. You didn't touch on it, but no capital budget. No money for new schools or new classrooms. That's a big problem for us as one of the fastest growing districts in probably the state of Washington. Do you have any updates or anything that you can offer with regard to that? Or is that a whole nother presentation, another night, and a lot of complex slides?
I think that short of calling a special session, it'll be something that, I think short of calling a special session, it's just another element that's going to be discussed in the short session. The problem is that it really doesn't have to do with schools. It has to do with the water rights issue and a few things that is held hostage.
Right.
But
We're being held
nevertheless, it is
hostage.
holding hostage resources that Mike and his team are counting on, and we're counting on for our future capital needs. But the concern also is that there was no conversation about K-3 meaningful. A few years ago, what did they threw in a little bit of a grant, and when you looked at it, it might have bought 2 portables. I mean, we're talking about significant investments, and if they don't have a conversation about it, you're having one here, because in order to meet needs of our kids, we need classrooms to do it in an effective way. So I don't think that there's going to be any conversation that'll aid you in your bond decision, and I wouldn't look forward to this short session dealing at all with K-3. It's more about releasing the capital budget and helping transportation and schools and everybody else in the state who's in a holding pattern.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very, again, complex because of what we're dealing with here. But, you know, a simple message is that McCleary is not solving any of our capacity issues and was never meant to address that, really.
No.
Well,
The legislators' answer to the McCleary decision isn't doing that. I think
yes.
the McCleary
Okay.
decision embeds the capital resource need, but the legislature's not responding to
They're
that.
not
Right.
responding.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that, actually. So I just think that's a very important piece for our public to understand,
Yes.
because that is one of our biggest issues we'll face going into the next year, in addition to paying teachers and such. But we didn't touch on it tonight. So
Right, we're 36 classrooms short, and that's not including enrollment growth.
and potentially in a situation like Mukilteo, where we're going to have to forfeit funding
Correct.
for lowering class sizes and doing better things for our families and students because of that.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I know this is a lot to digest, and I'm certain we're going to be seeing more of this in the coming weeks and months. So thank you so much for the time you've spent to work through some of these details and to, well, you and your
Our team.
Yeah, we know what
thank
that means. So we really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. With that behind us, we come to our second public comment time slot. Dr. Cohn, do we have any additional public comments for our second comment period?
We do not.
Okay. With that, I believe we're going to take a 15-minute break, so we will recess until 6:15.
Thank you. I am not.
Good afternoon and welcome to the August 29th meeting of Everett Public Schools Board of Directors. This is technically our last year of the meeting, the last meeting of the year. You can see where I've been all summer. Although it feels like the first, actually. Before we begin tonight, we'd like to take a moment of silence. Dr. Cohn?
Yes, so you'll see in front of the room, just off to my right, your left, a table that's been set up with some candles and some diploma covers from our high schools. Many of you probably know that in July, we experienced the loss of 3 Jackson High School students due to a terrible car crash, a crash that affected many students, their families, staff, and many community members. Travis Nelson was a 10th grade student last year. Prior to Jackson High School, he attended Gateway and Silver Firs elementary schools. Landon Staley was a 10th grade student last year. He also attended Gateway Middle and Silver Firs elementary school. Kayla Sorensen was a 9th grade student last year. Prior to Jackson High, she attended Heatherwood Middle and Woodside Elementary. The parents of these young people had hopes and dreams for their students. They thought about them graduating from Jackson High School, and they thought about the lives that they would lead. These candles and diplomas, similar to the type of ceremony that the military keeps for those lost, represents the gifts these families have given us, their children. The board asks that we take a moment of silence in honor of the lives lost too soon and in honor of what they could have become. May they rest in peace.
Thank you. Would you please join me for the flag salute?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Will the secretary please call the roll?
President Mason,
Present.
Vice President Andrews,
I am not.
Good afternoon and welcome to the August 29th meeting of Everett Public Schools Board of Directors. This is technically our last year of the meeting, the last meeting of the year. You can see where I've been all summer. Although it feels like the first, actually. Before we begin tonight, we'd like to take a moment of silence. Dr. Cohn?
Yes, so you'll see in front of the room, just off to my right, your left, a table that's been set up with some candles and some diploma covers from our high schools. Many of you probably know that in July, we experienced the loss of 3 Jackson High School students due to a terrible car crash, a crash that affected many students, their families, staff, and many community members. Travis Nelson was a 10th grade student last year. Prior to Jackson High School, he attended Gateway and Silver Firs elementary schools. Landon Staley was a 10th grade student last year. He also attended Gateway Middle and Silver Firs elementary school. Kayla Sorensen was a 9th grade student last year. Prior to Jackson High, she attended Heatherwood Middle and Woodside Elementary. The parents of these young people had hopes and dreams for their students. They thought about them graduating from Jackson High School, and they thought about the lives that they would lead. These candles and diplomas, similar to the type of ceremony that the military keeps for those lost. I am now.
Good afternoon and welcome to the August 29th meeting of Everett Public Schools Board of Directors. This is technically our last year of the meeting, or the last meeting of the year. I can see where I've been all summer. Although it feels like the first, actually. Before we begin tonight, we'd like to take a moment of silence. Dr. Cohen?
Yes, so you'll see in front of the room, just off to my right, your left, a table that's been set up with some candles and some diploma covers from our high schools. Many of you probably know that in July, we experienced the loss of 3 Jackson High School students due to a terrible car crash, a crash that affected many students, their families, staff, and many community members. Travis Nelson was a 10th grade student last year. Prior to Jackson High School, he attended Gateway and Silver Firs elementary schools. Landon Staley was a 10th grade student last year. He also attended Gateway Middle and Silver Firs elementary school. Kayla Sorensen was a 9th grade student last year. Prior to Jackson High, she attended Heatherwood Middle and Woodside Elementary. The parents of these young people had hopes and dreams for their students. They thought about them graduating from Jackson High School, and they thought about the lives that they would lead. These candles and diplomas, similar to the type of ceremony that the military keeps for those lost, represents the gifts these families have given us, their children. The board asks that we take a moment of silence in honor of the lives lost too soon and in honor of what they could have become. May they rest in peace.
Thank you. Would you please join me for the flag salute?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
Say that again?
You want me to introduce the sequence for this?
Sure. Good? Oh, we are, okay. Okay. We are now moving on to section 12.0, unfinished business, and tonight we have approval of resolution 1156, adoption of the operating budget for the fiscal year. And I think Dr. Cohn is going to first give us an overview of how this works, and then Ruth is going to introduce the budget to us.
So this item is a continuation of the budget adoption process. It is the second reading. Your first reading was loaded into the budget in July, and you have in the agenda description the dozen or so prior activities and actions that you've taken to get us to this point where we put the budget in front of you in its final form for second reading and adoption. We're also required at this point by law to hold a public hearing. So the process that we'll use is Ruth will go through the presentation to describe to you fundamentally the changes between the reading 2 version and the reading 1 version, because a few things change across the course of the summer, including the legislature. and then there's a period for you to ask questions. So questions versus make comments. So you ask questions, and then the board president opens the hearing. At the moment, there's nobody signed up. But if there is, we listen to them first. Then she closes the hearing. Then you go to, there's a motion right after the presentation and questions. There's a motion, hearing, close the hearing. Then you weigh in with your comments, if you have any, after having heard any public comments, which is, and then when you all are done, that's when that action occurs. So there's that sequence of presentation, questions, the motion on the table, debate, if you will, and we open it up to hearing before you do your debate work, okay? So that's why we do it in the sequence we do it. Ruth, you ready?
I'm ready.
Rock and roll. Thank you.
All right, after Jeff did the fun stuff for the out years, I'll go over our budget for 2017-18. As Dr. Cohn said, we did the first reading in July, which included preliminary revenues because the legislature had not yet completed their work. Today we'll go over the final numbers in preparation for the public hearing and adoption. The general fund review will show the changes since the first reading. The other funds have not changed since July, however. And for general fund, our beginning fund balance is expected to be higher than previously estimated at $22.8 million. Ending fund balance is budgeted at $18.3 million, which is about 6.5% of budgeted expenditures. The difference column on the slides in general fund are the change from July preliminary budget to the final budget. And as you can see, there's 4 million plus increases in revenues and expenditures. Much of that is related to an increase in the benefit rate, the medical benefit rate that the state flows through to us. And it really truly is a flow through. We spend the money for staff, and the state gives us that money. With a local match, of course, for the staff that are not funded by the state. FTE staffing changes since the preliminary budget. We did add a developmental kindergarten class at Silver Firs, so there was an additional teacher added and 2 paraeducators. In addition, there were a couple of classified positions added for grants, and then there are offsetting revenues attached to those. Budgeted revenues, state revenues went up mostly due to the medical increase, which as I said, have the expenditure offsets. Also included in the state special purpose are additional categorical funds for LAP and transitional bilingual and highly capable. And this is just a graphical representation of the revenues that displays the majority of our funds do come from state at 71%, and then our levy supports about 19% of revenues. And then MSOC, this is a required slide from the 2016 state legislature. We did add additional MSOC expenditures of about $200,000, and that is related to the additional categorical funding that we received. It was too late in the process to have a plan for sure of how we were going to spend those LAP and transitional bilingual dollars. So a lot of those I put in supplies, which results in an MSOC increase.
So,
And then the plans will come later.
yeah, actually, the plans those are occurring right now. Joyce and the assistant superintendents are working with those schools, primarily the schools in the North region, and they're putting together very detailed plans for how they're going to spend that LAP money. It's about $1.5 million, and they're putting together plans that are very specific around what their students are going to be doing with the teachers and the paraeducators, and what types of data we're going to collect to track the progress of student growth.
Most of these schools are the ones that are 50% or higher at free and reduced lunch, right?
Correct.
High free and reduced lunch, they have to qualify, yeah.
Yes.
And those schools like with 45 or 40%, they're just right on the cusp. They will not benefit from this.
They did not.
You are correct.
You're correct. They do not benefit from this.
Because there are still very needy kids.
Yes.
That category, or even at the schools that are 31 and 20%.
Okay, but that's the rule the state's given us.
They have to be 50%.
That's the rule the state's given us.
It flows through to those buildings, and we have compliance requirements that say that we spend the money on those buildings.
On the buildings that
Yes.
are 50%.
Yes. Our expenditure, we have a program summary, an activity summary, and an object summary. This is the program summary, and all of our programs did increase due to the medical benefit increase. Career and technical increased more than the benefits because of the additional funding through the CTE indirect rate decreasing from 15% to 5%. And as Jeff said, that really is money that is being dedicated to CTE as part of our apportionment. It's not new money coming in overall. It's just moving from basic ed into CTE to support that program. Special education and categorical expenditures also increased more due to the additional LAP funds and transitional bilingual funds, and those are offset by revenues. Here is a graphical of the program, and most of our expenditures are in basic ed, 74.3%, with special ed at 13.8%, and that is an increase from last year's budget. And we also have the program detail, and you'll see that CTE, or the vocational education programs, 31 and 34, have the biggest increases there on that page. And then LAP, which is program 55, also is that 1.4 million for the high poverty. And transitional bilingual, about 300,000. And the other programs, it's the medical increases. These expenditures are broken down by activity. Teaching and teaching support increased the most because it has the most value of our budget, and it also includes additional categorical funds. So that was about a 1.9% change in teaching and teaching support. Here is the graph of that. Teaching and teaching support is about almost 75% of our budget. And other support activities, which is 14%, include such items as food services, pupil transportation, maintenance, etc. And by object, you'll see that employee benefits and payroll taxes increased over $1.3 million, and that's where the medical increase lands, as well as a larger increase in supplies and materials, and that is a result of the categorical increases. And then object, as you know, about 85% of our expenditures are paid for, do pay for salaries and benefits. And then the other funds, there really has been no change. The differences on these page, it's the same as what you saw in July. Total appropriations for ASB remains at $3.1 million. Appropriations for debt service fund is $27.9 million. Appropriations for capital projects fund is $72.2 million, with an operating transfer to general funds scheduled to be $2.2 million. And then transportation vehicle fund, we have total expenditure appropriations of about $230,000. And I can answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Directors, do you have any questions on the budget changes since we last looked at it? Go ahead.
What was the medical benefit increase?
This year, or in 2016-17, the state provided $780 per month for each full-time staff member, and then it went up to $820, so $40 a month per month increase for 17-18, which does not generally outpace inflation and rising health costs.
Never
So did
does.
the revenues and expenses increase dollar for dollar? We just budgeted that way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
On,
So let's just double check the question and the answer. The amount of money coming from the state is provided to us in allocation. We take that allocation and we pay it into the trust.
Yes.
And the trust purchases the plan and distributes the benefits.
Correct.
Right? And then we also put additional money in, or we pay additional money to individuals because of the bargain agreements. So the amount is flowed through, plus we add from the levy.
Correct. That
For
hasn't
benefits.
changed with this, but
Just
as a general
so that
rule,
we're
we do.
clear that the state money's flowed through to the trust, and then we add levy money based on the.
About $400,000.
Thank you very much. And then the plans are purchased, and those dollars go out to the beneficiaries. Okay. Just want to make sure that we had that.
I have a question about slide 17. Oh, Carol, were you done?
go ahead.
Okay. I appreciate the fact that if expenditures, 75% is on teaching. Is there a benchmark in the state or anything that shows that our 75% is on par with where it should be or could be?
Historically, it has always been, we've always been in our enrollment range, very high in this category.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you go to the website and you go to the budget pages, there's a series of displays that compares us to districts our size, and we've been putting that up there for the last several years.
Okay.
So you can, the most recent data published by the state that provides us that comparison, you can see where we are in every one of those categories.
So we pay more in that category than a lot of other?
Historically, we have put more into teaching and teaching support and less into administrative costs,
Okay, thank you.
and certainly less into maintenance costs.
Maintenance, yes, as well. It's less.
Director Andrews, did you have another question?
I was trying to formulate here. I'm just wondering what the increase in the CTE budget, what sort of effect does that have? Are we able to offer more classes, or is it really just more of a sort of a reallocation of funds to that category? Have there been some real programmatic changes, I guess is what I'm asking, because of that?
As much as we can, if the district had already been spending money on the CTE program in addition to what the state provided, then we are using this money to fund that first. And then if there will be, I'm sure, additional funds, and there will need to be a plan made for how that will help the program. And I don't know if Dr. Riley Black has any thoughts on that.
So I know Brian Day, our CTE director, is working on this, and we're looking both at the in the classroom as well as the extended programs, the CTSOs, the career technical student organizations, and expanding those. And we're meeting, I believe, next week to review our plans with Dr. Scott. And so we'll have more confirmation on that shortly. But we are sensitive to that indirect rate change and trying to figure out how do we best cooperate with how those funds can better be allocated across the system.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I jump in? Because along those lines, a follow-up question. I guess I don't completely understand what the decrease, we're going from 15 to 5, but we're getting more money. Can you
We're getting
re-explain?
We're getting more money because a little bit more money because the amount of teachers class sizes that they generate also decreased a little bit. So CTE program is getting truly additional money, and the whole system is getting more money because of that. In addition, because of the medical benefits, this program is getting more because of that. However, the indirect rate was 15%, and so that 15% is taken off the top of the amount of money we get for CTE and used for other things within the system. So it's like my salary and utilities and principals and all of those things that can't be directly charged to the CTE program. We're able to take an indirect rate for that, an overhead rate, if you will, and use that to pay back the district for some of those things, overhead items. Does that help? Mm-hmm. Okay. So when they decrease that, that takes away money for those overhead items, and we have to figure out where that gap comes from.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a good answer. I just was going to mention that historically what the district has done with indirects is we try to maximize our ability to have discretionary resources. And so when you maximize the indirects, even though we're reinvesting in STEM, the board may have another direction they want to go with that investment. So this sort of changed the game. It doesn't give us that flexibility. And if you looked at it, say, aviation high school or a 100% STEM high school, CTE doesn't allow us to pay for a principal, so that has to come out of the general fund. So if you go into a high school, you can charge part of the librarian for the, but you can't charge the principal. There's certain disallowances, and so they basically just changed the rules and said you need to invest more in pure CTE, which means we don't have the same latitude with covering other costs.
I understand what you're saying, but when we have a program in which it is a combination STEM CTE kind of program, are we essentially at a loss for the additional funds that we can then manage how we want to spend it, or are we, are we beneficiaries of additional funds that we can then manage how we want to spend it?
So the funds, fundamentally, the funding change to CTE said, okay, we used to give you 100% of the money, and you could take 15%, and you could pay for the support structures because you weren't getting basic ed money for that. They're saying we're going to reduce that to 5%.
Yes.
You got to find some other way to pay for those support structures, which means more money flows into the CTE program. Now, if the enrollment drops, the class size drops, maybe you offer more sections because you can afford them. Maybe you offer more programs because you can afford it. Maybe you invest in equipment because you can afford it. Now out of the CTE program. It's the legislature's policy method of getting more money into CTE, which is often equated with STEM emphasis, right? Yeah. Okay.
So we're having to cut back in other areas.
That is additional funds for STEM.
CTE, which is their way of getting at STEM. But you don't use CTE money for math classes. Unless the math classes are related directly
I was just about to ask for dual.
to an employment code that qualifies for it. You don't spend that money on science classes, general ed science classes. We've restructured a number of our science classes so that the teacher, and certified the teachers so that they can be part of CTE. So we, over the last several years, have blended STEM and CTE in ways that maybe some others haven't. We don't know because we don't know how they all do their, 295 of them out there, or 94, doing their work. So what we can tell you is how we've changed over time in order to integrate STEM throughout our work. And that's one of the reasons Dana's responsibility set is STEM and CTE, because we work so hard to blend those things and then build on that approach across the district. This directs more money to programs that qualify under those CTE codes. So the program has to qualify and the teacher has to qualify. Now, if it happens to be also qualified as a science credit, good on us, right? So does that help? Okay, very good.
And also keep in mind that CTE programs are only secondary, and so any of your STEM courses in elementary couldn't be charged there, and so we needed to find other resources for those kinds of programs.
Please.
I'm struggling here on page 5, and I want to make sure that I understand what you're asking us to approve the budget, but essentially you're asking us to approve a budget with a deficit of $4.5 million that will be taken out of the fund balance.
That's correct.
And I'm trying to recall a time as a board when we were asked to approve a budget that had a deficit. And in light of the previous presentation, when we're looking at volatility, for lack of a better term, in funding, I could make an argument to say you want to have a higher fund balance, not a lower fund balance, because there's so many unknowns. And so is that a fair characterization?
It is. We do, part of those expenditure authorizations would include some contingency expenditures as well that wouldn't necessarily need to be spent. There were some program requests, you did a board work session on the requests that went through, and those part of those are in the budget. They just haven't been approved to move forward yet.
So I think it's better that we take the question that has multiple parts and answer a few of the parts. One of the parts is that we've never asked the board to approve a deficit budget before. Is that accurate, Mr. Moore?
No, that's not. In fact, what we've done is over time, and I think probably when you were on the Fiscal Advisory Council during the years when we elected to use fund balance to maintain our programs rather than cutting, only to receive a benefit of McCleary. So there were several years, if you were to look at fund balance history, we've been as high as 14%. We've gone up and down. So while we're producing a multi-year budget, the intent is to manage our fund balance to establish the maximum effect on instruction, knowing, as we mentioned in our board retreat and at the first reading, that if we are facing cuts, in fact, these programs that we're enhancing may the next year need to be turned around and reduced. So
over multiple years, when you look, we've run surpluses and deficits in order to smooth the effect on the program, maintain momentum, and increase over time our graduation rates and reduce gaps so that we're not in the business of laying off and then hiring and laying off and hiring. And this budget, while it projects, and we will typically project more expenses than we actually accrue, that's one of the ways that we manage conservatively, projects a $4.457 million deficit, which is one of the questions the newspaper was asking us. Why are the other districts making a lot of public noise about their deficits and you're not? And the answer that we've provided is because we've managed very carefully over the years in a range. We try not to let our balance get too high because that has very severe consequences. And we try to let the balance not get too low because that has very severe consequences. Now, we can debate the values of high and low, but basically you have a policy of 5%. I managed to 6% plus, around 6%. Mr. Moore would like a little higher one, but we try to maintain below 9%. Actually, I'd like it a little below 8%. And we want to make sure that we hit a target that our bond rating firms feel very comfortable with because they increase our bond rating and that goes very well in the financial market. So we try to manage it in that range. Remember, we saved a lot of money because we were really concerned about the levy cliff. We still have some concern about the levy cliff, but we now know the picture a little bit better if you're looking at 4 or 5 years out. You don't bargain for 4 or 5 years out when you're sitting at the table with unions. You bargain for the next year or the next 3 years. So we're very careful not to do something that communicates to staff that we're withholding money, right, from employees. So we're very careful. Same argument that you advanced with our ASBs. When we see our ASBs holding too much money and we tell them the money is for the program, don't sit on it, don't hoard it, don't build up big balances. So we're trying to maintain a reasonable range and be able to fund using the fund balance over a couple years of legislative craziness until things level out a little bit.
Yeah, and Mike, I don't disagree with your characterization. My question really is one of philosophy and the new world order that we're trying to understand. Might it be in our best interest to carry a higher fund balance? And we can debate the merits of that.
Well, we can, and I might answer, we are carrying a higher fund balance, and going much above where we are may be counterproductive for us. It's a worthwhile discussion. A little late in the process for us to be making big changes in these numbers.
Directors, any additional questions?
Oh, thank you.
Okay, hearing none, we will open our hearing. The chair will entertain a motion to approve Resolution 1156, adoption of the operating budget for fiscal year 2017-2018.
So moved.
Is there a second motion to approve Resolution 1156?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve Resolution 1156, adopting of the operating budget for fiscal year 2017-18. In accordance with RCW 28A.505.060, the superintendent has caused notice of a public hearing on the budget to be published in a newspaper of general circulation on August 15th and 22nd, and a public hearing on the proposed resolution is hereby open. Public comments are invited on the budget adoption. Are there any requests to provide public comment on the budget?
There were no requests when I checked just before we started this item, and the communications director is shaking her head that there are no requests to speak by any member of the public.
Okay. Okay, since there are no comments, the public hearing on Resolution 1156, adoption of the operating budget for fiscal year 2017-2018, is hereby closed. Board comments are now invited on the motion before us. Are there any comments, directors? Okay. Hearing no further discussion,
I actually have a comment. I think we're going to have to closely monitor as a board the multi-year budgeting process as the legislative outcomes unravel, and be very mindful of what that looks like. And there's just a lot of moving parts that, quite frankly, was a wonderful presentation by Mr. Moore, and yet it causes discomfort. And when it causes discomfort, you know, I tend to tighten the wallet a bit. And so that's really the nature of my comments earlier. So.
thank you. Any others? Okay. With no further discussion on the motion to approve Resolution 1156, we will proceed to the vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. All abstaining from action on the motion, say I abstain. And provide a reason for the abstentions, please. Okay. The motion is approved. The motion to approve Resolution 1115, adoption of the operating budget for fiscal year 2017-18 is carried. Someone's happy with that.
Ruth can go home now.
Yeah,
We have a budget.
at least till tomorrow, right? Sorry, Ruth. We need you too much. Okay. That takes us on to, sorry, organize my notes quickly. Section 13.0, new business. And tonight, 13.01 is the adoption of Resolution 1158, affirming our commitment to safe and inclusive schools for each student. And Dr. Lancaster is going to introduce the resolution for us.
So I'm honored to present Resolution 1158 for your consideration. I'm going to start by going back to approximately 7 years ago, where 200 community members, staff, students, and families came together to develop a shared vision for the future of the Everett Public Schools. A community vision for learning was developed, driven by the identified core values of equity, passion, collaboration, respect, learning, diversity, and integrity. These values, determined and defined by our community, have guided our work. While you've heard them before, I think it's important to read these terms again with the definitions and think about them in context of this resolution. Equity. We honor and support each student's right to learn and achieve. Diversity. We embrace diversity as an essential asset. We are inclusive and treat our differences as a core strength. Collaboration. We believe in learning and working together, the values of diverse views, and the power of collective wisdom. Respect. We value differences among people and treat each other with respect. Integrity. We act in good faith, serving others with honesty and dignity. We serve as stewards of public trust. Passion. We are passionate about teaching and learning. And finally, learning. We believe each student has the ability to learn and achieve to high standards. These values have held true over time and have propelled Everett to be one of the best districts in our county and arguably one of the best in the state. So these values, mapped out by our community nearly a decade ago, are alive and well in our schools. The Everett Public Schools is a learning institution. Our goal is that each student leaves us college, career, and life ready. Ensuring a safe learning-focused environment is a precursor to student success. Credit is due to our educational professionals and support staff who remain focused on our values and care passionately about the education success of students. These committed staff address conflicts directly with they help keep our schools safe, and they work tirelessly to maintain a culture of calm and a laser-like focus on learning. Now, recent national events outside of our district have caused us to pause and reflect on the values that have propelled our district forward in such a calm and consistent fashion. Reports of increased incidents of acts of hate, violence, racism, and intimidation across the country have caused a heightened sense of anxiety for many students and families in the Everett Public Schools, including Dreamers, or students who have benefited from the DREAM Act. This anxiety motivated district staff to examine our policies and practices and generate options for supporting students and families to assist in relieving their concern and assuring them that we are committed to providing a safe learning place for everyone. One method of supporting our students and their families, district staff, and the community is a board statement reaffirming existing district values, policies, procedures, practices, and providing direction to the superintendent regarding the maintenance of a welcoming environment. To that end, we put before the board Resolution 1158. This resolution affirms the school board's commitment to our core values and the provision of a safe and inclusive schools for each student without regard to race, color, national origin, creed, religion, sex, sexual orientation, including gender expression or identity, marital status, age, disability, or immigration status. A continued emphasis on these policies and procedures guided by our core values will benefit Everett as we serve the next generation of our community's children. Resolution 1158 is designed to accomplish this end, and we recommend board approval.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That was a nice summary. I'm going to start by just saying I'm proud of our district for stepping forward to make this kind of statement, both to our community and to our schools, and probably most importantly to our families. I will also say it's important, and it offers an opportunity to continually look at our policies and improve them where we can, and this has afforded us that opportunity, but I think at a very disappointing cost that we are in 2017 and we are discussing this and having to address this in this manner due to the national political climate and unfortunately in some of our local climate too. So directors, do you have anything to comment or any questions regarding this resolution?
I have one question that I apologize I did not have time to get back to you sooner. The fourth whereas. Directors recognize that our history teaches us our citizenry can overcome fear that begets hate, can uphold the rights and dignity of all members of our community, and that we must never enable those who would act otherwise. My question about putting that negative statement in there, never enable those who would act otherwise, while we might not condone the right of people to what they have to say, we must respect everyone's right to a freedom of speech. And while we are primarily working with minors and the things that go around that with freedom of speech, I just wonder if that statement in there does show that we are somehow trying to hinder, because it reads to me, a person's right to freedom of speech, where in the schools they do not have the right to speak with harm. I just think that the following statement about keeping our students safe is really what that last statement is trying to say, and wonder if we can just keep it at the positive. We have learned that we can overcome the hate. We do uphold the dignity of all students in our communities, and we uphold the dignity, and then just move on to the next statement, just so that the entire message really is one of positive about how we do stand up to this and support every staff and student member here. It's a question. Very long one, sorry. I know it's all printed and ready to be signed, but I just...
Can you just go back to where you started?
So it would be, the board recognizes that our history teaches us citizenry.
Okay.
Teaches us our citizenry can overcome fear that begets hate, then add an and uphold the rights and dignity of all members of our community, semicolon. and just take out the statement that says, and never enable those who would act otherwise, because the next statement says we will keep our students safe. In that next paragraph, that's what it says. I just have concern with.
I don't think I read it that way. I guess I'm interpreting it slightly differently.
I look at that as, we must never enable those who would act otherwise, but that doesn't mean that we don't support their right for free speech and free thought. We won't enable them in their actions towards other students. But it doesn't say that we're going to not allow them their right to free speech or free thought. We just won't enable them. You don't see it that way.
I still don't see it that way. I just see it as, I do see it as we would, this is tough. This is a tough subject because I apologize that I do not know who said, I might not agree with what you have to say, but I agree with your right to say it. And I think that we cannot change the feelings and perceptions that come out of the homes of our students. And we cannot condone it either. And we would not be enabling it because we would not have the conversations in our schools that would allow for that to grow. But I just wonder if putting that statement in there about never, I see it as a negative statement in an otherwise positive reaffirming document. And if I'm over,
I think I see that last piece that you want to drop is, to me, it's an affirmation that we will not allow that behavior in our schools, the way that I interpret it, which is part of our policies.
Yes.
So it's reflective of that. We're not telling people how to behave. We're saying that we have a policy that we do not tolerate and allow that type of
We will never
behavior.
you know, you can think what you want to think, you can say what you want to say over there.
Over there, at the flat, yeah.
You cannot say that here. We're not going to enable you and give you a soapbox to stand on to say what you want to say.
And that was affirmed by a suit. You have the right to say it, you just have the right to say it over there.
Over there.
And we're not enabling you to do it in the cafeteria, we're not enabling you to do it on the,
Campus,
at Mascot, you have to do it over there. Okay,
it's not going to enable your actions.
okay. But we're not,
We're not taking away your
right.
right to think, your right to speak, but we're not going to enable those on the campus.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that because I think that it is open for that interpretation. And so having this discussion, I think helps clarify it. So thank you. That was the only statement I had a question about.
Yeah. Any other language that directors would like to discuss or?
I have a question, kind of a procedural thing. I, excuse me, wholeheartedly support this, but I'm wondering how we will communicate it to our students, staff, community.
That's a good question.
Needs to be translated. Will it be posted in schools? You know, what are the next steps, I guess? And maybe those are still to be determined, but it's a very strong statement, and so everyone needs to be able to hear it. See.
I can tell you a couple of the steps that I plan. You may have more in mind and provide that direction. I have an email that's nearly finished, drafted, that will carry this to all staff, and then the communications department will reduce it because we typically don't put something that long on
Not a whereas.
my webpage. The resolutions are available to folks, but we don't generally post them. We'll put something on my webpage that will be a summary of what's going out, and then folks will be able to click on it and access the electronic version of this, which will then have all the links if they want to use them, because the hard copy that you signed doesn't. We have not considered translating it. We could, if you wanted to translate it into the 5 languages. That would take a little while, and we could put some links up for that, and we could add that to your board page if you'd like that. I mean, there are a number of things we can do to increase the chances that people will see it. If you'd like, we can, when we do our next, or we could do a special edition, if you would like, of In Touch. Typically, there's a board email that goes out. This would be included in the board email, and a link would be provided to people. We could wait to do that until we had all the translations done. They do take some time, especially when it's complex language. I would suggest that, we normally use 5. We normally translate up to 5, the top 5 languages. So it depends on how quickly you want it communicated. My objective in bringing it to you today was so that tomorrow I can get the English version out with my communication to everyone in the district, and we can put the information on the webpage. Hadn't really anticipated the amount of time it would take to translate whether you wanted it in multiple places. I would see it going in normally, because Leanna would summarize this and it goes in your board, that the newsletter that we set up for you, electronic one that we set up for you, it could go in the next In Touch. And I thought about doing a news release, but I haven't asked for that to be done. It depends on whether you'd like to do that. We certainly can do that.
I think something in the,
I think once you've adopted it, I think we can certainly talk about what you'd like to do with it.
and I think that if it went out in English with other translations pending, because that does take time, and I think that every way we can communicate in the quarterly newsletters and In Touch, any way we can get out a communication of tolerance and bigotry will not be tolerated, which is, I just contradicted myself. But just that how, any way we can communicate and demonstrate and model would be very important.
I would like to just reiterate what Director Mason said. It's sad that at this point in time, we feel the burden, I guess you would say, of having to release a statement like this, a resolution like this. But one thing that I do like very much about this resolution, it has in it what our core values have been. We haven't deviated from that. Our core values still remain those. And it also mentions the policies that we have implemented, and we haven't deviated from that. We haven't had to generate new policies or new values to support the climate that we're in. But
We have modified our policies for the changing climate, not with previous year, because of, we have had to modify our policies because of the previous changing climate to add for tolerance.
Add for things,
Yes.
but not because we did not have it
Yes.
in the basic foundational evidence was not there. I mean, it's different when you have a district or a group or an organization in which you have to then start afresh. We're not starting afresh, but it is sad that because of the climate, just like what you mentioned, that the climate that we're in, that we feel the burden of having to restate some of our initial values and our core values and our beliefs and our policies. But what I do like is that we haven't had to build something from scratch. I mean, it's always been there.
I agree. I think to Dr. Lancaster's point, we've been engaged in this work for a very long time. And this resolution is actually not changing the direction of what we've been doing at all. It's just reaffirming publicly and maybe a slightly stronger message than we have previously communicated, just so people really understand.
But I'm not to say that, we're doing this because now somebody has shamed us to do this.
Correct.
This is not the case. We're doing this because the climate has so radically changed that we feel that we need to let everybody know the things that we have stood for some time, and we still stand for those things.
Any final thoughts or questions? With that, I would like to call for a motion for the recommendation to approve the adoption of Resolution 1158, affirming our commitment to safe and inclusive schools for each student.
So moved.
There a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Director Wenta and seconded by Director Lassane to approve adoption of Resolution 1158, affirming our commitment to safe and inclusive schools for each student. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, no. The motion carries. Thank you. Now we move to 13.02, approval of board annual goals 2016-17 progress report.
So you have in front of you the, what I hope is the last go-around on your goals for the year. Excuse me, that we're closing out this month. I've updated the counts of the various things that you've done, trimmed a couple of the statements, and generally updated your report, your self-report, and did not change any of the colors on any of the items. I thought I'd leave that to you. You simply can tell me whether you like it or you want to make some changes, and we'll get on with life, and we won't work on it at your workshop tomorrow. Unless you'd like to.
Well, I think we've seen this several times now, and not much has changed other than we have obviously had a few more presentations, done a little bit more work in some of these core areas. Do directors have any questions, or do they have any suggestions or comments regarding our report? Pam, can you grab your mic? Thank you.
In all honesty, I think that item 2D, monitor the development of a new early learning plan. We've had one session on that, and we did have a symposium on that, and there was representation of the board at that symposium. So in all honesty, we have completed the monitoring the development of a new early learning. So I think in some respect, that should be green. Now, have we gone on to the implementation phase of that? No, but that doesn't say that. It says monitor the development of a new early learning plan.
Don't look at me, that's your report. I just, if it's the consensus of the board that you want it green, we'll make it green.
I think I don't mean to counter, and I do appreciate the fact that you went to the early learning symposium. But I wonder though, because of the uncertainty of the future and the freeze on capital budgets and lots of things that are making us maybe delay any implementation of development of anything, I wonder if it should still say yellow, just to communicate the fact that it's not a done deal, and that it is something that is still being batted around. I don't know if that's the right term, but that would just be my question for keeping it yellow, just because it's, while we did learn, we did do activities, it's not done. And not that green means done, but this isn't monitoring financial reports where we get green because yes, we did it. So it's just a question.
Whether have you had thoughts on that?
I can go with that. I can go with that because I still believe there needs to be the next stage. But I look at it with the funding that we currently have and the climate, with the legislature about that. I'm not quite sure, are we going to be able to do that next step?
And so that it goes green because we met the goal.
We met the
of
goal.
evaluating it.
We met the goal of the development of it, and a plan has been established. And the goal
I
will
don't know if I agree
continue.
with that we have an established plan. I think we're a
We
plan.
have a proposed plan.
And I guess maybe I'm more in the yellow category because we did last year and then early into this past school year put some more time into this topic, but it did fall off pretty dramatically when we realized that the financial future of early learning is still fairly uncertain and could change that plan that we've developed quite a bit still.
Good, yes.
And we really haven't had a report or followed up since that symposium as a board.
I can live with the yellow. I can live with that too. But it means that we're waiting for a financial outlook.
We are, yeah.
That would allow us to do further, add more to that plan.
I agree with that.
Are directors comfortable with leaving it yellow, or is? Okay. Any other items that you'd like to discuss? Okay. Given that we have looked at this a couple times now and no significant changes since last time, this item would be approved by general consent. Everyone's in agreement with as it stands. Okay? That moves us on to 13.03, approval of YMCF Snohomish County Special Facilities and Services Agreement and Addenda. Mr. Gunn, you're going to walk us through this. Thank you.
I will. So this is the approval of the Special Facilities and Services Agreement between the school district and the YMCA. Normally, this is an annual renewal and the agreement would be good for 1 year. This has been modified so that it's actually a 5-year agreement. And then even at that point, it would continue on unless it was modified or canceled by either party. The objective tonight is to obtain board approval of this agreement. The overview is that we will do a brief review of the agreement, have discussions or questions, comments by the board, and then ask that you approve it. And as always, we have the links to the strategic plan, key performance outcome 5.1A. A brief review, this agreement has been in place for 28 years, longer than I've been here. September 1 to 2017 to August 31 of 2022 is the term of this agreement. Again, as I mentioned, 5 years. In this agreement, the YMCA provides a number of programs and services to the school district, and the school district in turn offers use of the facilities and makes various commitments to do certain things at each of the sites, as well as transportation. And that's kind of a real high-level overview. The YMCA specifically provides school-age childcare in 6 elementary schools during the school year and the summer, Make a Splash programs for three elementaries, Hang Time and My Achievers program for after-school recreation programs for middle and high school students, Big Brothers and Big Sisters at all grade levels, and occasional evening childcare for district-sponsored events. As long as I think we have.
Just ask for that to take place in May.
I think they've committed to providing childcare for up to 4 district-sponsored events. And I think the key there is that we have to, I think, provide them, I think it's 2 weeks of lead time on that.
And the Make a Splash program, what is that?
Yes, it is.
Our high poverty schools, I believe.
Yes. That is for,
It's a program that you find at multiple YMCA's in the country. It's a branded swimming program.
and it's at Garfield, Hawthorne, and Jackson Elementary, so they would be the high poverty schools.
We can take you on a visit if you'd like. Just don't get too close to the edge of the pool.
Okay, so in return for this, the district provides use of the space and guarantee that the space is safe and healthy for the use that it will be subjected to. The space that we provide the use of are typically gyms, cafeterias, restrooms, playgrounds, some storage areas as well, supervision and transportation for special education and swim team students, as well as bus transportation to and from school and YMCA childcare programs at 12 elementary schools. We also, we also provide parking spaces for up to 4 YMCA buses at Cedarwood and up to 2 at Jackson Elementary School during the summer. We also provide student cohort data for use by the Big Brothers and Big Sisters in the MAP programs. I think there's a caveat in the agreement that just says that it has to be in conformance with applicable laws and policies and board policy and procedure. There are 2 addendums that we're going to ask you to approve as well. The first one has to do with the swim teams from Cascade and Cascade and Everett High Schools. There are allowed use of the swimming pool at the YMCA. And we also, in this agreement, are allowed to provide that our special services students are allowed to use of the swimming pool. There is also an anticipation in the future that this agreement, this addendum to the agreement, could be modified as agreed upon between the parties to deal with the future YMCA to be constructed at the Colby campus. That would be in the future. This agreement, the addendum number 1 goes for 5 years. Addendum number 2 actually only goes for 1 year, and it is for the My Achievers program. And this is kind of a new thing for us to do in this agreement, and it's where we actually provide performance criteria for the MAP program to provide information on and to track results on. And then we provide funding at a base level with some incentive funding depending on how good their performance is. So the base funding, I think, is $12,000. They can earn up to another $12,000 for a total of $24,000 for the year. For that, they have to provide staff surveys 4 times a year, student surveys weekly and at the end of the semester, and then school principals sit down to meet quarterly to review the evidence of performance, and then the YMCA and district central office staff would meet at the end of the semester to review the data and evaluate program impact. So with that, I would ask for your approval of the Special Facilities and Services Agreement for 2017 through 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Gunn.
As well as addendums 1 and 2. Thank you.
Directors, do you have any questions regarding this agreement?
The number of schools that have Y programs, the number of schools that bus to those Y programs, as we add elementary school, 18, 19, 20, 21, number of buses at Cedarwood as they grow students, those are finite numbers in a 5-year contract. I wonder if will it have to come back before us when we get school 19 if we need more buses, just because those are finite numbers?
Absolutely. Any time we see the need to adjust these, either party could bring forward a suggested change to the agreement.
Okay.
Certainly, in a 5-year time frame with the growth that we have, we would find some good reasons to modify the agreement over that time.
Okay, thank you.
Does the swim program include dive as well? Do you know?
I do not believe so. My understanding is the YMCA, and there are a number of experts in the room here, I'm sure. My understanding is the YMCA does not provide diving boards in their pools. due to liability reasons.
Okay, I got you. So will our dive team use other facilities, and will we have to pay for transportation for those kids?
The diving is up at up at the city pool. That's where the meets occur.
Forest Park.
Forest Park is,
pool.
oh, so Forest Park is still open. They're not going to be
Yes.
shut down as going through renovation or anything right now.
I don't think the Y pool's deep enough
That may
for
be
diving.
different, but yeah. But Ys generally don't build their pools or insure for diving.
Okay,
So the diving's not a part of this.
okay. So when the Kobe campus opens, they're not going to include diving capability. Only I say that because Forest Park is the only one, and sometimes when they have maintenance, it's unavailable for dive.
That's true.
That would be a YMCA.
They'd have to go to Mariner or
Someplace
another
else.
school.
Yeah. We just paid for a new diving board up there, so we know they've got diving. 15 grand.
Where is that? At Forest Park?
Yeah.
Oh, we just paid? Oh, good.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They're
That's
still working out the
Yes,
timeline
we bought a new
for
diving board because
installation.
we needed a diving board. But that's a different topic.
Gotcha.
Any other questions or
But they
comments?
dive at the naval station too, so they can also take.
Send them down there.
Yeah, but that's tanks and,
No, they dive
Just kidding,
there.
just
They
kidding.
dive there.
Well, it'd be interesting to see how the MAP, the My Achievers program plays out. I appreciate the incentives, and obviously the evaluation of the program and the tracking of the data is important. Some of it seems a bit cumbersome. There's a lot of reporting to do. So we'll try it for a year, and you guys will adjust where necessary.
And that is one area that I'm pretty sure you would see us back here in a year talking with you about what to do to renew that.
Yeah, you'll have a year of data at that point to understand
Yeah.
how that program worked.
Yeah.
Okay. With that, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the recommendation, approval of the Special Facilities and Services Agreement and Addenda Number 1 and 2 between Everett Public Schools and the YMCA of Snohomish County, and authorize the superintendent to sign these agreements.
So move.
Second?
Thank you. That was my next sentence. It has been moved by Director Lassane and seconded by Director Mitchell. In accordance with our policy, state law, and advice of counsel, Director Wenta will recuse himself from the discussion and actions on this item to avoid a conflict of interest due to his position as Vice President of the YMCA of Snohomish County. I think your title's slightly different, isn't it? Hasn't it changed just a bit? The Secretary will ensure that his recusal and abstention from the vote are recorded in the minutes. Board comments are now invited on the motion before us. No comments? Okay. There are no further discussion on the motion to approve the Special Facilities and Services Agreement and Addenda Number 1 and 2 between Everett Public Schools and the YMCA of Snohomish County, and to authorize the superintendent to sign the agreements. We will proceed to the vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. All opposed to the motion, say no. All abstaining from action on the motion, say I abstain.
I abstain.
Okay, the motion to approve the recommendation is carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. This brings us to our upcoming agenda items. Dr. Cohen, where are we headed next?
Well, item 14.1 on your upcoming agenda item calendar is your August 30 and 31 annual planning workshop, and you begin that tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., and we are at the port offices, and then the next day we are at in the Chancellor's Conference Room at the University, Washington State University, Everett.
Bad form.
Item 14, and that agenda has been published to you and has gone public. Sorry, it's just
Little slip.
yeah, I don't know whether it's just frequency or husky fever. I'm not sure which. Item 14.2 is a snapshot of the regular meeting schedule for September 12. You have professional development systems progress as your strategic progress monitoring item, and I will tell you that Cabinet went through that presentation on Monday, and you are going to be so excited about what's in that. You've got a variety of operating business items. WASDA legislative proposals are coming up. We're going to confirm any director liaison assignments unless you decide to act on them at your workshop tomorrow, if you decide to change them. Any school review assignments, any board meeting change practices that come out of your workshop. You've got basic ed verification. If you do not approve your the superintendent goals or the board annual goals, they'll be on your agenda. Otherwise, these things will get wiped off. And I suspect we'll have an Archbishop Murphy agreement. We have an agreement with them on the dive team. There's a produce contract, and an item that's not on here that Mike expects to be able to bring to you is an authorization to proceed with an eminent domain on several properties related to the construction of future schools. We will be bringing those things to you as they are ready and briefing you ahead of time with respect to the actual formation of the agenda. 14.3 is the special meeting, September 19. It is your annual student performance and educational effectiveness survey trends review presented by Greg Lobdell, the president of the Center for Education Effectiveness. That generally is followed at on another occasion by internal data analysis presented by Dr. Matthews. So you've got a wonderfully packed September with the start of school and a couple of special meetings and regular meetings between, I should say, now and the end of that month. That's your calendar.
And we are off and running. With that, do directors have any comments to share this evening? I'll start with you, Director Mitchell.
I'll try to be brief. I am very thankful for the YMCA this summer, which had their first ever leadership and training program, where my daughter and 5 or 6 kids from Uncle Tio all participated in Skyway leadership training. She got CPR certified and first aid certified and was able to volunteer just a few sessions, but this sets her up for next year to have her summer filled because there's little a 15-year-old can do. And then also she really enjoyed her time at Cedarwood again and did ask a question if at their ward stay at Cedarwood, if she could please be there again because there were some little girls from her Skyway that are at Cedarwood and she was encouraging them through the Y to do their reading, so they want to see her there. So it's just kind of a funny full circle there. And then I just, with our statement we have to make because of the current climate, my heart and prayers go out to everyone in Houston, and especially those that have lost their life and the hundreds of thousands of people that are being displaced. But the images on the news show the very best of what America makes us America and makes us the greatest country. And I am thankful that my company does match gifts and encouraged us to give. And I really am embarrassed that it takes such a tragedy to show such greatness. But my hearts and prayers, and I heard an officer lost his life today, and it's a very traumatic thing that's happening right now. So thank you.
Dr. Andrews?
As was mentioned earlier, I did have the pleasure of attending the early part of the new staff orientation, and it was very exciting to see all the new staff in the room and the enthusiasm and the excitement, and I was truly impressed by the offerings and what the training that they were given in those 4 days. That has to be so helpful in starting in a district, whether you're a new teacher or experienced. It just really was very, very comprehensive. That was also the day of the eclipse, and I want to again thank Dana, who, as I was leaving, offered me a pair of eclipse glasses so I could actually watch it. And I wanted her to know that we were at a park, and there was a family there with about 3 children, and they didn't have any glasses, so we shared those glasses, and those children were able to see the eclipse. They had their cereal boxes and were trying to project it, but it just wasn't working. So I was really happy. I was thankful for your generosity and was really happy to share them as well. So we had a little science lesson going on there that day. Other than that, I live just around the corner from Heatherwood School, and I can see the activity picking up already, and it's exciting. So I'm excited for the summer to end and school to begin.
Well, I can't say that I'm excited for summer to end, but I am excited for school to begin. So I'm looking forward to the energy that our kids will bring to the classrooms when they walk through the doors, and the energy that our teachers and staff are also going to bring when they see those kids smiling up at them and saying, "Teach me, teach me." So I'm looking forward to it.
I appreciate the heavy lift of the proclamation that was done tonight. You know, it is a lot of opinions that came forward, and I know, Dr. Cohn, you were asked to really take all those and create a statement that people could coalesce around, and so thank you for that. I think if we can do it in the 5 top languages, I think that was a wonderful addition that Director Andrews added. And we're off and running. It's another school year, so I'm excited about that and excited about the board retreat.
I'm good. Thanks very much.
Okay. I would say the same about re-engaging in board work. It's exciting. It's delightful to take a break and spend time with family and re-energize, and I hope everyone here had an opportunity to do that because it is busy once it starts up, and you guys know it better than we do. So looking forward to another school year. Thank you, everyone. We have no executive session or closed session this evening. So with that, I would like to adjourn the August 29th Board of Directors, Everett Public School Board of Directors meeting.